Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is your man, Big B, Brien Hanley, and welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. It is game of the week. There's a couple that are out there this week, but I think we all know which one is which, BYU and Iowa State. There's still a few other games that are definitely worth talking about, which we will here in a second, but the game of the week, BYU, see if they can keep that winning streak alive against Iowa State. Should be a very, very good ball game. So let's break all that down. But before we get into it, remember to like, follow, subscribe, continue to get in the comments like you always do, and always hit that notification bell so you know exactly when Big 12 Insiders content comes out. So first off, there are a couple of other games, like I mentioned, that are absolutely worth noting. Look, Houston at Arizona State. Houston, this is a big game for them. They had a big test previously. Now, Arizona was clearly a big test, but they played one of the perceived big boys in the conference a few weeks back at Texas Tech, got them at home, and got demolished. They're going on the road this time. Arizona State, again, one of the perceived big boys in the conference. What is it going to look like this time? You know, Arizona State's coming off a huge win last week. Are they going to have an emotional letdown? Can they afford it? The first answer to that, no, they can't afford to have an emotional letdown because they're still in the thick of this thing. But you lose, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball. Arizona State set themselves up pretty by winning last week. You lose here. Number one, that's 2 losses in the conference. But 2, Houston only has 1. Now you're behind them. They would be setting themselves up for a huge disappointment. So big game there. Another big game, Baylor at Cincinnati. Now, I know some people will think, well, Baylor is finished, and they very well might be. Do they have enough left? Can they play spoiler? You know, it's tough because they're a talented team, but do they defend well enough? Can they stop the run? You know, are those going to be something? TCU ran it all over them last week in the slop. Cincinnati, I think, has a better run game than TCU, but Baylor's going to keep attacking you. They're not going to stop attacking you. But we'll see how that handles. The first thing is, as far as Cincinnati, they have a tough stretch. You know, this is the beginning of that tough ending stretch, and we're going to find out a lot about that football team starting on Saturday because, again, they have the inside track to get to Arlington. Win out, you're there. It's that simple. Your destiny's in your own hands. It's not an easy stretch, but they do control it. They do control it. But those are 2 games, notable games. I know there's a couple others out there, but they don't really have that big of an impact as those 2, and definitely not of the game of the week, which, again, is BYU traveling to Ames. Now, look, first off, BYU, how are they going to handle such basically coming off such an emotional win last week? It didn't look good last year. If you remember, they started off the season hot, beat BYU or beat Utah, Then the next week they lost to an inferior Kansas team. Now, Kansas had gotten hot at that particular time. I get it, but I don't think there's anybody out there that wouldn't tell you that BYU was a better football team than Kansas. Well, this may be the same situation, except Iowa State is clearly better than what Kansas was. So it's a little slippery of a slope here. So Bear Bachmeier, will he again need to prove himself with his arm? I'm thinking probably. Iowa State's not great against the run. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But how Iowa State? First off, so many people in the comments are like, come on, Big B, what are you talking about? You called Iowa State a fraud. And I'm not backing off of that. But what I will say is this. 2 things can be true. Frauds can win football games too. It happens. You know, just because you're a fraud and you're not as good as we think you should be or that you are, that doesn't mean that you can never win a game. That's not what that means, people. Come on, you know better than that. I mean, and we're going to find out. That's the thing. You know, can they stand up after, you know, having a week off, regrouping. Are they going to stand up and say, okay, our season isn't over. We still have an opportunity here to get to Arlington. We need some help, but we're not out of this thing by any means. A win on Saturday would go a long way in saying, hey, we're back. Big B, you were wrong. We're not a fraud. And by all means, prove me wrong. You know me, I don't care. if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It is what it is. I think they are fraud because I think they should be better. You can't be losing to Colorado. You're trying to win the conference. You can't lose to Colorado. I don't care. I just don't care. But this is where we are. So let's talk about the keys to the game. And again, old offensive lineman, the line of scrimmage is going to be important. Now here, I think it's a big advantage to BYU because BYU, number one, they're third in the conference against the run. Iowa State doesn't run the football that well. Now, I know they've run it against a couple of teams. They just don't run it that well. They're middle of the pack. So that's an advantage to BYU. BYU shuts down the run. And Iowa State doesn't really stop the run that well either. Again, middle of the pack, where BYU is third in the conference. Actually, I take that back. They're second in the conference at rushing at 232 yards a game. So they're going to get after you physically. Can Iowa State stand up to that test? I mentioned Bear Bachmeier. What's he going to do? Because, another key is obviously quarterbacks being special. Well, this is where Iowa State has the advantage because, look, Rocco Beck is a better quarterback than Bear Bachmeier, and he should be. I mean, a true freshman versus a senior. I mean, why the hell shouldn't he be? But he's definitely more accomplished passer, better as far as accuracy. He's just a better thrower of the football. Okay? He can also run it when need be, and they call a lot of quarterback runs. So he's not as dangerous as Bachmeier may be running the ball, not as physical a runner as Bachmeier. But I think that's where Iowa State will have the advantage because I think they're going to roll some coverages, mix up some stuff on the back end, try to confuse the true freshman. First of all, they're going to try to win on first and second down and keep them behind the sticks. I think that's the key. If you can do that, and again, they haven't been great all year at doing that, but if you can do that, keep them in a lot of third and longs, third and sixes, third and sevens, and not because BYU will go for it on fourth down, not third and six on the plus 40-yard line. Because if you do that, then BYU's just going to run it to try to get closer on fourth down and then go for it on fourth. That's not what I'm talking about. Third and six on their own 27. You can do that. They're going to throw the football. I wouldn't guess that BYU would try to go for it in that type of situation, but you never know. I mean, we saw it last week, the craziness in that BYU-Utah game, and then the old analytics getting in the way, the old nerd football getting in the way of actual common sense. Seems like sometimes these coaches do that. We'll see. But Rocco Beck, Iowa State has a big advantage when it comes to which quarterback is going to be special. That's not disrespect to Bear Bachmeier. He's just a true freshman versus this guy that's a senior. He's seen basically everything. What are you supposed to do? Okay. It is what it is at that point. Our special team is going to be special. There's not really an advantage. I know if you look up the stats, you'll see as far as kickoff return or punt returns, I should say, you'll see that Iowa State is tops in the conference and they average 30 yards of return, but they only had 4. So it's not like they've had 20 or something of that nature to have a big sample size. They've had 4, and one of those was a 65-yarder. So if you want to say that's advantage, okay, but it's just not a huge sample size. And both teams are pretty good. BYU's 4th, as far as punt returns. It's not like they're last or something like that. So we'll see about that. Here's the thing, the hidden yardage. Who can win that battle? Forget the returns and all that kind of stuff. Like, who can win the battle as far as the turnover margin, which we'll get into? Who can win penalties? Who's going to make more mental mistakes? I think that's what this game is going to come down to, is what team is under control, and wins the line of scrimmage, under control, quarterback can be special, those type of things. Hidden yardage is always important when it comes to these close football games. So the prediction, look, turnover margin, like I mentioned before, BYU tied for 15th in the country at +1. They do an outstanding job. Iowa State's not horrible. They're 54th in the country, but they're still +0.2. So they're not despicable. A little bit better than halfway, but BYU has that advantage. Now, here's the thing. The atmosphere is going to be incredible. We've heard of Hilton Magic at Iowa State. We've heard a ton of that. Are we going to hear some Jack Trice magic? Will that be a thing? If you haven't been there, if you haven't seen a game there, it's different. It's different. I'll tell you that much. It's a different atmosphere, ladies and gentlemen. So it's going to be an outstanding environment. Look, yesterday, you guys, I gave you my prediction on the game, and this is the thing. I think Iowa State regroups. I think that they say, you know what, we're not out of this thing. We have an opportunity to put ourselves in a position to possibly get to Arlington. That's where we were predicted. That's where we're going to eventually get to. I think they regroup. I think they win this game. And the reason is I think their path to victory is a little bit more clear, or should I say they have more ways to win the game than BYU. Now, that doesn't mean BYU can't win, and it doesn't mean that BYU doesn't have ways, because I know there'll be some people, oh, you said BYU had no way to get into the game. Rah, rah, rah. No, I didn't say that. All I said was Iowa State has more ways to win than BYU, and it's true. They do. They do. But that doesn't mean that that's what will happen. That's the key. I believe that it will. Nothing is guaranteed in this world. That's just what I believe. I think that Iowa State will capitalize on the several different ways that they have to win. One of those ways will win the day. 27-23, Iowa State takes this one, gets its season back on track. BYU season won't fall off, but they got some tough matchups still left. Unfortunately, I think it stops here. BYU fans are happy now because I've picked against them for I don't know how long in these tough matchups, and they keep winning. So they are overjoyed that I have picked Iowa State to win this game. I don't know if Iowa State fans are happy, though. They're still mad at me for calling them frauds, but I'm not going to back off that. Win this game and just say, Big B, you were wrong. And you'll be like, hey, you know what? I wasn't wrong at the time, but at least you changed my mind for this week. So I appreciate everybody. Thank you, as always, for showing up. It's been a fun week. Look, I will be obviously making some videos throughout Saturday. But as I mentioned to you all, and I've said it a couple times through the week, it's a Hanley Halloween party on Saturday. So the Halloween party gets a little bizarre, a little wild, a little crazy here. Maybe I'll have a costume on. Maybe I won't. I don't know. You'll have to see. Should be fun no matter what. Can't wait to watch the games on Saturday, guys. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, get in those comments. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for watching the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. This has been a Spirit Street production.